camera was pointed at the wrong thing. It belonged to a car wash, mounted to catch vandalism or theft on the property, not the sidewalk behind it. But on the evening of February the 1st, 2004, that camera captured something else entirely. A man in a mechanic's uniform grabbing an 11-year-old girl by the wrist and walking her out of frame, forever. Within 72 hours, that grainy, silent footage had been broadcast on television screens across the entire country. It would become one of the most consequential pieces of surveillance video in the history of American criminal investigation, not because of what happened afterward, but because of how directly it led investigators to the man responsible. This is Carlie Brucia's story. This is Unsolved and Unforgotten. Tonight's case unfolded almost entirely on camera, in real time, and became a national flashpoint for questions about how the justice system handles repeat offenders on probation. Everything in this episode is drawn from court records, trial testimony, and verified reporting through 2026. Carlie Jane Brucia was born in 1992, the daughter of Susan Shorpen and Joseph Brucia. By February of 2004, she was 11 years old, a sixth grader living in Sarasota, Florida, on Florida's Gulf Coast. On Sunday, February the 1st, 2004, Super Bowl Sunday, Carlie had spent the day at a friend's house. Between 6 to 10 and 6:15 that evening, she left to walk home. Her friend's mother called Carlie's mother to confirm that permission had been given for her to walk home alone, a routine parental check that, under any other circumstances, would have been entirely unremarkable. Carlie took a shortcut behind a closed car wash on Bee Ridge Road, cutting through the property rather than following the street directly. It was a route, like so many in this series, that had likely been walked without incident many times before. The car wash's security system, installed to monitor the business's own property rather than the public sidewalk beside it, happened to capture the sidewalk area in its field of view. At approximately 6:15 that evening, the camera recorded a man approaching Carlie, speaking briefly with her, and then taking her by the wrist and leading her away, off camera, behind the building. Carlie's parents reported her missing within roughly half an hour of her expected arrival home, an unusually fast response time that reflected both close parental attention and, tragically, how little time there actually was between Carlie leaving her friend's house and her disappearance being noticed. Investigators recovered the car wash's surveillance footage quickly, and on the evening of February the 2nd, 2004, the video was released to the media. An Amber Alert was issued for Carlie. The footage, grainy, silent, and utterly ordinary looking in its brutality, was broadcast on national television within hours, reaching an audience already primed for exactly this kind of dread by decades of prior missing child cases. The video showed a heavy-set, tattooed man wearing what appeared to be a mechanic's uniform. Carlie's father, Joseph Brucia, later told ABC News that anyone who watched the footage carefully could see, from the expression on his daughter's face, that she did not know her abductor and had not gone with him willingly, a detail he emphasized publicly to counter any assumption that she might have known or trusted the man. The speed with which Carlie's abductor was identified stands out, even among the cases covered on this channel, as unusually fast, a direct product of how widely the surveillance footage circulated. On the morning of February the 3rd, 2004, the wife of a former business associate of a man named Joseph P. Smith recognized him in the broadcast footage and contacted police. Separately, at least one other acquaintance called in with the same identification. Smith, a 37-year-old auto mechanic and father of 3, was taken into custody that same day. At the time of his arrest, Smith was not immediately charged in connection with Carlie's disappearance. Investigators did not yet have enough evidence to file charges specifically tied to her case. Instead, he was held without bond on a probation violation stemming from an earlier cocaine conviction. Sheriff Bill Balkwell told reporters at the time that investigators had made clear to Smith and his attorney that they wanted to know where Carlie was. Smith did not cooperate. On February the 6th, 2004, 5 days after Carlie's abduction, her body was found on the grounds of a church, roughly 3 miles from the car wash where she had last been seen. The medical examiner determined that she had been killed by strangulation with a ligature. She had also been sexually assaulted. On February the 20th, 2004, Smith was formally indicted on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and capital sexual battery. As details of Joseph Smith's criminal history emerged in the days following his arrest, the case rapidly became a national flashpoint for questions about how Florida's criminal justice and probation systems handled repeat offenders. According to the Florida Department of Corrections' own subsequent review, Smith had been arrested at least 13 times in Florida since 1993 and had a prior kidnapping and false imprisonment charge from an earlier case in which he was ultimately acquitted. At the time of Carlie's murder, Smith was on probation for an unrelated cocaine conviction. Critically, just a month before Carlie's abduction, a state probation officer had formally asked a circuit judge to find Smith in violation of that probation for failing to pay required fines and court costs, and the judge had declined to do so. Had that violation been granted in January of 2004, Smith would very likely have been back in custody at the time Carlie disappeared. This single detail became one of the most publicly scrutinized aspects of the entire case, fueling broader debate across Florida and the country about probation oversight for offenders with extensive prior records. Joseph Smith's murder trial began in the fall of 2005. Prosecutors built their case around several converging strands of evidence: the surveillance footage itself, testimony from Smith's own friends and co-workers who independently recognized him in the video, DNA and hair analysis evidence connecting him to the crime, and, according to trial testimony, an account from Smith's own brother stating that Smith had confessed to him. On November the 17th, 2005, after roughly 5 hours of jury deliberation, Smith was found guilty of murder, sexual battery on a child under the age of 12, and kidnapping. He showed no visible emotional reaction when the verdict was read. Carlie's mother, Susan Shorpen, wept quietly in the courtroom. Her father, Joseph Brucia, nodded as each conviction was announced. Outside the courthouse afterward, Shorpen told reporters she would not rest until Smith was dead, describing him in blunt terms as a disgusting, perverted animal responsible for taking one of the most precious things in her life. The penalty phase of Smith's trial began on November the 28th, 2005. His defense attorney argued for a sentence of life in prison without parole, telling the jury that Smith had been in the grip of drug addiction and was, in that specific sense, out of control at the time of the crime, an argument aimed at establishing mitigating circumstances that might spare him a death sentence. The jury recommended death. The court formally sentenced Joseph Smith to death later that year, a sentence he would spend the following 16 years appealing through Florida's state and federal court systems without success. Beyond the immediate outrage over the missed probation violation, Carlie Brucia's case contributed to a broader national conversation, already underway following cases like Polly Klaas's roughly a decade earlier, about how repeat offenders were tracked, monitored, and released back into communities. The surveillance footage itself became one of the most widely cited examples, in the years that followed, of how quickly video evidence circulated by broadcast media could accelerate an active criminal investigation, a template that would go on to inform how law enforcement agencies approached public appeals for identification in numerous cases afterward. Sarasota County and Florida more broadly faced sustained public pressure in the years following Carlie's murder to tighten probation violation procedures for offenders with extensive prior arrest histories. Though the precise legislative and administrative changes that followed were less centralized and less widely publicized than the sweeping statutory reforms that followed Polly Klaas's case in California a decade earlier, Joseph Smith remained on Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution in Rayford for 16 years following his conviction, continuing to appeal his sentence without success. On July the 26th, 2021, Smith died in custody. His cause of death was not publicly released by corrections officials. 12th Judicial Circuit State Attorney Ed Brodsky released a statement following Smith's death, saying that while nothing could bring Carlie back, her family, her friends, and the entire Sarasota community could finally have closure, without any further court proceedings required to hold Smith accountable. If Carlie Brucia were alive today, she would be in her mid-30s. Carlie Brucia's final known moments exist on video, a piece of evidence never intended to capture what it did, mounted to watch over a car wash rather than a child walking home. That footage led investigators to her abductor within 72 hours, an extraordinarily fast resolution by the standards of nearly every other case in this series. And yet speed did not spare Carlie's life, and it took 16 more years, and Joseph Smith's own death in custody, for the case to reach whatever final resting point a case like this can actually reach. What Carlie's case leaves behind is a hard question that the Florida Department of Corrections itself was forced to confront publicly, whether a routine, unremarkable decision, declining to act on a probation violation over unpaid court fines, left a known repeat offender free. On the exact evening, he crossed paths with an 11-year-old girl walking home from a friend's house. If this episode helped you understand how quickly a piece of surveillance footage changed the course of an entire investigation, please like this video, leave a comment, text 5, and subscribe to Unsolved and Unforgotten for our next case. She is missing no longer. She is not forgotten.